All right. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Good morning. We're here today, obviously, to talk about the support that the government's providing for victims and fulfilling a commitment that we made to make the justice system more victim-centric, and you will have just heard the details of that. We're also making another announcement today around extending the retail crime prevention program and providing additional funding for that. We've seen the very successful rollout of a range of additional support to retail businesses, small retail businesses that have been the victims of crime, including things like ram raiding. A number of different interventions have been supported, from fog cannons to bollards to roller doors, things that will make those businesses safer and less likely to become repeat victims. Because we're putting the details of that out as well today, I'll get the Minister of Police to run through the details of that, and then we're happy to open up for questions. Ginny.
Kia ora koutou. So today we've announced an additional $9 million to the Retail Crime Prevention Fund. This fund has already had $6 million in funding. What this funding will do will continue to provide that support to retail owners who feel exposed. Currently we've seen over 900 interventions put into place and completed, and we are sitting at 2,000 of those that are in train. And that it covers, as the Prime Minister has said, a range of different features depending on that particular business. Fog cannons, security cameras, and also different bollards are put in place for those. So it's been received well by the community, and I'm looking forward to this popular scheme continuing to be implemented.
Okay. Happy to open up for questions.
Some of that detail that we just heard in the announcement was pretty disturbing, about children being questioned around consent when being sexually assaulted. I mean, it's almost bizarre these laws are still in place.
Yeah, and I think in some cases it's because the discrepancy between the two different potential charges means that the prosecutors are incentivised to use one, which is not the most appropriate charge because of the differing levels of sentences. And so remedying this will ultimately mean that the system is much more victim-centric and much more appropriate for children going through what could be an incredibly traumatic experience.
Are you or Minister Allan able just to provide some more detail about aligning those two charges, the 14-year compared to the 20-year, just a bit more detail, please?
As the Prime Minister just said, it's really about bringing into alignment the penalties for the two charges. There's two charges that a prosecutor can choose to pursue. The offence specific to children carries that maximum penalty of 14 years. The more broader sexual violation charge, that carries a maximum penalty of 20 years. For that specific offence, you have to be able to show that there was reasonable belief and consent. So, where the prosecutors will inevitably go more often than not, and rightly so, is that they want to go for the charge that has the tougher penalty, but that means putting children into a position where they are having to say whether or not their unlawful sexual connection was enjoyable, whether they consented to it, whether it was appropriate. Children, as we've heard from the Chief Victims Advisor, as young as 6 years old. We don't think that is appropriate. We don't think New Zealanders consider that appropriate. So the best way to get around that is to lift the penalty for the offending that relates to a child, so that the prosecutor can then pursue that unlawful connection with a child offence, as opposed to having to go to that broader one, which requires that element of consent.
Minister, you've also done some work to stop litigation abuse. Are you concerned that this could inadvertently harm victims who may have to continue to go to the family court to maintain protection orders against their former partners?
I am very confident that the amendments we are making today will have a significant positive impact for those people that have been involved in family litigation proceedings, where they have been turned into a football, an abusive cycle football, and it's been identified by the courts and by many of our victim advocates for years that the challenge is that whilst the judge can say no to litigation abuse at the outset, vexatious litigation, etc., they haven't been able to do that once proceedings have commenced. So you can file a whole range of different types of appeals. We call them interlocutory applications, different applications upon applications upon applications. a case that I'm thinking of recently, 7-year period, over 100 different applications bought, and that is not uncommon, unfortunately. Every single person that has worked alongside victims within family matters and proceedings will know that this is, unfortunately, a tool that's been far too used by far too many for far too long.
What will these changes announced today mean for the victims?
I think, and you probably saw the response from some of the victim support workers in the room, I think that what we will see is that there will be an incredible amount of the fact that victims have been hurt. That's one of the biggest challenges in our justice system, because the justice system wasn't designed around victims, and there are reasons for that. But it's meant that the role of victims, their voices have had to be tagged on at various parts in the process, and it just simply hasn't worked. We have particularly targeted the pain points that victims experience, so those victims of serious crime are having to retell and live through that trauma time and time again. Children, as we've discussed, being interrogated over a whole range of matters that New Zealanders would find absolutely abhorrent. The additional support through to Manaaki Tangata, victim support, and through the victims support scheme, assistance scheme. This enables those that are working with those that have experienced incredible trauma to be supported in a way that helps them more.
Are you confident that this new funding will be enough, considering since Cyclone Gabrielle there was an increase in that? Do you believe that this will be enough?
I think that the funding that we have provided, we've seen a doubling of the funding for the victim support and a tripling of the funding for the victims assistance scheme. This is an inordinate amount of funding that has gone to both of those services, and we know it will have a far greater reach.
Perhaps could I acknowledge as well that this work and the announcements that we've made today sit alongside other work that we're doing to improve the court processes, to improve the processes that police use when following cases from start to finish. Because we acknowledge that at the moment there are too many snags in that process. There are too many instances where people are having to retell their story, where they're being re-traumatised by experiences. Victims showing up at court to find that actually the case didn't proceed on that day, and potentially having to do that multiple times and having to sit around in courtrooms for days on end waiting for their case to actually be heard. We're investing quite a lot of money in streamlining and improving those processes to make that system operate as it's intended to operate, to deal with some of that inefficiency, and that will actually result in a much more victim-centric outcome from the justice system as a whole as well.
Prime Minister, back to retail crime.
Yes.
On that boost announced today, can you just talk me through why that extra funding has been allocated? What's the need for that?
We acknowledge that for those small victims that have been those small businesses, I should say, that have been the victims of retail crime, potentially something as traumatic as a ram raid, it can have a long and lasting consequence. And we've got people who don't feel safe in their own businesses. And in some cases, it's not just their business, it's their home as well. So if you think about a small dairy, they often live on site as well. So we want to make sure that they are feeling confident and safe in their business. There are a range of security measures that we can put in place that will help with that. It might be something as substantial as bollards, for example, which actually stop things like ram raids, but it can be something as simple as a fog cannon. So in the case of an aggravated robbery, we know that fog cannons are incredibly effective at deterring that level of offending, but also keeping the potential victims of that safe so that they can get out and get to a place of safety as quickly as possible. So all of these things will make a difference. We've seen good high levels of demand. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's good, but we've seen high levels of demand from these businesses wanting to access this support. We want to be able to support those businesses to get those extra security protections in place. So today's announcement really means that we can deliver on that. Lots of commentary around this particular program. It is hitting top speed now. Businesses are getting the support, they're getting the interventions in place. It is very successful, and so we want to keep the momentum going on it.
Is that extra boost sort of an admission that it's a problem that's not going away though.
What we have seen is that the intensive work that we're doing to really target those repeat young offenders is making a difference. It is getting them off the street. It is stopping that pattern and that cycle of reoffending. So this isn't an either-or situation. We want to make sure these businesses and the people working in them feel safe, and that they've got those security measures in place that helps them to feel safe. But we also want to reduce the chances of them becoming victims again in the first place. And that means really intensively targeting those repeat offenders, which is what we've been doing. And that is very successful. So those young offenders that have been through the programs that we've put in place and that we've been funding are far less likely to be reoffending. That's a good start. When one ram raid is a ram raid too many, as far as I'm concerned. So we've just got to keep going. But I think that the trend numbers are pointing in the right direction now. We are making good progress.
And just lastly on that, how long is the wait for business owners, and how many business owners have been approved this far?
If you look at the fog cannon subsidies, for example, we're turning around the applications for those very quickly. So that's a digital process. They can fill in a form, they'll get a response to that quite quickly, and then the amount of time that they have to wait to get their fog cannon installed is really going to be up to the market. It depends how fast the providers can actually get there and install them. And we've seen hundreds of those being installed. So the market's really scaling up to deliver those faster, and that's really encouraging. Some of the other interventions take a bit longer. So something like bollards, for example, those are often the things that take the longest, because you can come into council, interact with council bylaws there around what you can and can't do, and so navigating through that to make sure that the bollards are installed. That's probably the slowest part of the process. Something like roller doors, they can be quite quick to install. One of the things that slows that down sometimes is if there's an insurance claim that sits alongside that, where the front of the shop has to be rebuilt. The interface between those things can slow down, but I'm confident that at the government end we've got the wheels moving quickly. That doesn't mean that the outcome is going to be an overnight one, but it does mean that we can, in some cases, you might get the fog cannon quite quickly. The bollards might take a little bit longer.
Prime Minister, is that petrol discount going to go?
We indicated when we announced that we were continuing the fuel tax discount through to the middle of the year, and that there's a budget between when we made that announcement and the middle of the year. We've also indicated in the budget that we'll be looking to support New Zealanders through the cost of living crisis with more targeted supports. The across the board fuel tax cut it's pretty blunt. It's right the way across the board. We did indicate that we would be looking at more targeted cost of living support, and you'll see that focus in the budget.
And Prime Minister, were you aware that in the 2020 general election, the Race Relations Commissioner Meng Foon who's supposed to be independent and politically neutral, was donating thousands of dollars to a Labour Party MP?
No, I wasn't aware of that. No.
Are you concerned about that?
It ultimately needs to be declared, and if clearly it will have been declared if you're aware of that. Whether or not someone who holds those public advocacy roles should be donating politically and aligning themselves politically with a political party, that is probably something that I'd be a little uncomfortable about. I wasn't aware of it until you've just asked me about it right now, so I'd want to think about that a bit more. But I do think that people holding those roles need to be seen to be politically impartial.
Minister Allan, could we ask you why you took those donations, please?
Well, I didn't take any monetary donations from Meng Foon.
You declared a $1,500 donation and also more than $9,000 in
rent. Yeah. So there has been, there was definitely rental subsidies provided through one of the properties his wife owned. Whether that was through Meng or through his wife, I can't recall. But he did provide an office space.
Do you think that's appropriate for you to be taking, their role, Human Rights Commissioner's role, is to hold the government to account. It's not to be bankrolling government MPs.
I agree it's not to be bankrolling MPs. Look, I felt pretty comfortable. It was well disclosed. It was his wife's shop. It was an empty shop that they owned on the main drag. We paid some nominal sum, or a sum per week. And so that's and that's all been declared.
Minister, as Justice Minister, though, you are responsible for appointing, reappointing or removing human rights commissioners, right? How can you do that when you're taking money from them?
I certainly wasn't involved in the appointment of Meng Foon. I was a backbench MP at the time of his appointment. I am now, but I wasn't at the time when I was running for electoral office in 2020, which is the time of those donations. I had nothing to do with Meng Foon's appointment.
Yeah, I realise that. But Do you think it's appropriate to take money from a human rights commissioner?
Well, I think it was appropriate that his wife donated the space. We utilised that space. It was an empty shop on the main drag, and that was declared.
Yeah, have you declared a conflict of interest with Cabinet?
With Ming Foon, everything that has been declared would have been through my office processes, but I'd have to go and check that.
Because under the Cabinet manual, right, you're supposed to declare conflicts of interest.
Absolutely. So everything is, yeah. Well,
so you have declared a conflict of interest with Cabinet?
look, I don't know particularly with Ming Foon. I'd have to go and check, but I assume that everything that's in my donation declarations has been declared. And then anything that's required to declare for Cabinet, we have intensive discussions about that. So there would have been some alignment, I presume, but I'll go and check that.
Prime Minister, are you concerned that a police complaint has been made against a member of the Amul delegation?
Sorry, start that one again.
No worries. Are you concerned that a police complaint has been made against a member of the Amul delegation?
Sorry, I don't have any details on that. Happy to look into that.
Have you been briefed on that by the police?
Not at this point, no. I don't know whether the Minister has any.
I've read the article, but I've not been briefed.
Yeah. We have, neither of us have been briefed on that, so we can't really sort of share any more detail on that.
Prime Minister, did anything you heard just before from Minister Allan, does anything there raise any red flags for you?
No, it doesn't. We have a conflict of interest process in place to manage any potential conflicts. The conflict of interest process involving the Cabinet Office does look at things like political donations, for example, so that if someone who's made a political donation comes up for appointment, a minister, who has a conflict would be excused from participating in that process. So we've got well-established processes for managing that. I do think we should differentiate a little between in-kind contributions and cash contributions. And so, without knowing details of it and without having had the opportunity to consider the details of it, nothing that the Minister has just indicated provides me any cause for concern.
Prime Minister, did you get to catch up with the UK Foreign Secretary while he was here for, sounds like, only a few hours?
Yeah.
Do you know what's happened there and if this will impact New Zealand's trip with Samoa and general, what have we missed out on?
We were due to meet tomorrow. Unfortunately, he's had to return back to the UK to deal with the situation in Sudan, which I think everyone will acknowledge is a tragic situation there and one that the UK government will be very focused on, and he's gone back to lead their response to that. So I'm obviously disappointed not to have the opportunity to meet this time. I am heading to the UK in just over a week, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to meet with the Prime Minister whilst I'm over there and make further progress around our trade arrangements with the UK during that time as well.
Do you know if this affected Minister Mahuta's trip in Samoa?
No, I don't have information on that, sorry.
Prime Minister, just on Otago University, it's going to be cutting several hundred jobs. It says it hasn't had enough inflation support from government. Will the government consider stepping in to help before redundancies happen?
Well, first of all, can I acknowledge that a situation where anyone's job is in question is very difficult for them, and so I want to extend that to the staff at the University of Otago and acknowledge that it's an uncertain time for them at the moment. Every year in the budget, we set out what additional support we'll be providing to education providers, and that includes our universities. And so we're about a month away from setting out that detail around what support will be provided to the institutions for inflationary pressures, because we acknowledge that there has been inflation. There have been some other things at play there as well with the universities, though. We've seen softer domestic enrolments this year than many had been forecasting, and the international education sector globally is taking longer to rebuild post the global pandemic than we might have expected. So our domestic settings in terms of visas for international students are good. We're processing those visas very quickly as students are applying for them, so we're getting them into the country very quickly. The challenge is that fewer international students across the board are travelling following the global pandemic, and so the international education sector is taking some time to rebuild, and our domestic institutions, our universities, our schools, our polytechs, they have to adapt to that reality. So all of the decisions they make around staffing are theirs. They have institutional autonomy. I can't direct them around the decisions that they make. But I would also note that the budget's just over a month away now.
Prime Minister, the situation in West Papua, is the Kiwi pilot, Philip Mertens, is he still alive?
That is my understanding. Obviously, I'm reluctant to share too much in the way of details whilst that's a very live situation on the ground. The New Zealand government continues to condemn the taking of hostages. That's not the way we think any kind of political point should be made, and we do want to seek a peaceful resolution to that. Our message to the hostage takers now is exactly the same as it has been right from the beginning, which is that they should release the hostage. They should let him get back to his New Zealand family, who are very anxious to see him again and to know that he is okay. He should not be tied up in any political disagreement that they have.
And did the New Zealand government in some way get asthma medication to him?
I don't want to comment again on the logistics of sort of a live situation at the moment, but the New Zealand government has been doing all we can to support the situation, and that includes supporting the pilot's family.
And are you aware of the increased military activity there, and what concerns are there for being able to extract him?
So in answer to the first part of the question, yes. In answer to the second part of the question, I can't really go into the details of that.
Your trip to Australia, what's top of the agenda, just to move ahead?
So I think, as I've already foreshadowed, I think the number one topic of conversation when I meet with Prime Minister Albanese will be the treatment of New Zealanders in Australia, and I'm very optimistic that we're making good progress there, and we'll have some good news to share as a result of that. I do imagine that broader conversations will take place then, and we'll be seeing each other a bit in the UK as well for the King's coronation, and I imagine that we'll continue to have conversations about broader international issues and the importance, I think, of the Trans-Tasman relationship. It's 40th year of CER, and a significant milestone for New Zealand. Our economies are very much intertwined with one another, so our relationship with Australia is a really important one. I can say at a government to government level, it's in very good shape.
Yep. Just one last question: do you expect to be briefed on the police complaint regarding the Amalderi delegation visit?
No, sorry. The Minister of Police might be, but I typically wouldn't be briefed on those kind of things.
Will New Zealand stop the men involved from leaving the country while police assess the complaint?
Again, that's not something that we've had briefings on yet.
And just one more. Are we trying to woo India here for a dairy deal?
Look, trade is a very important topic for New Zealand. I don't want to get into the topics of or the potential trade negotiations that may or may not take place in time. India is a country that we do have a trading relationship with. We're always looking for how we can strengthen our trading relationships. If you look at the track record of this government, we've got the UK Free Trade Agreement, the European Union Free Trade Agreement, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Tasman Trans-Pacific Partnership, so the CPTPP, work on the ASEAN trade arrangements that have borne significant fruit during our time in government, upgrade of the China Free Trade Agreement, and of course our trading relationship with Australia, which I've just mentioned around CER and the work that we do to continue to strengthen that. So I think we've got a very good track record on trade. When it comes to whether or not we can achieve a free trade agreement with India, I've never taken that off the table, but I'm also not announcing that today that we're going to do it.
So just to be clear, Prime Minister, you are comfortable with Labour Party MPs taking political donations from government officials who are supposed to be politically neutral?
As I've indicated, it depends on the specifics of a case, and I don't want to provide a specific answer on that until I've had the opportunity to have a look at the details of it. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone.